Hello everyone, this is Shannon from Not So Po, and today I'm doing week 42 of my 2022 reads. This week I have a ton to wrap up because not only do I have a bunch of books that I read this week, but I also have a bunch of books that I recently talked about in a vlog that I posted that I want to wrap up here as well. Timestamps and content warnings are in the description box below. First, I did NFN, or Not For Now, one book. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a term that I use to talk about a book that isn't quite a pause and isn't quite a DNF. It's just something that wasn't working for me right now, and sometime in the future I'd like to give a try, but I'm not going to continue trying to read it. And that is Middlemarch by George Eliot. So since it's October and I thought, hey, it's Victober, I have been wanting to read Middlemarch for such a long time. I've heard such good things about it. That will be just the perfect kind of cozy Victorian read. So I picked this up and I got 7% in before I realized this actually isn't fitting my mood. And I think part of that is that this is a long book. It's something like 900 pages. And I think I thought this was going to be super soft and gentle, but actually it's got a little bit of biting social commentary, which is something that I really enjoy. But I just read The Warden by Anthony Trollope, which had really biting social commentary, and sometimes that one was just a little bit too much. So I think I was just feeling a little worn out on that right now, and it wasn't feeling comforting for me, which is what I was in the mood for. So this one I have set aside, and I will come back to at some point in the future, but it's just not what I want to read right now. So then I decided to pick up a book that is on my owned ebook TBR that I've had for a couple of years there and have been meaning to get to, which is Rain and Ruin by J.D. Evans. This is a book where I had heard the author speak on a panel, and she sounded really interesting, and I wanted to give her book a try, but as often happens with the ebooks that I buy, it just sat on my e-reader and I had not picked it up until this year. I am trying to work through my own TBR, and Angela at Literature Science Alliance, who I'll link below, read this recently, and so it kind of reminded me, oh yeah, that's one of the ones I want to get to this year. Maybe I'll pick that up. Angela had kind of a mixed experience with it, but it was like fantasy romance, and I thought, hey, that could fit my mood. So I picked it up, and not only did it fit my mood, it so fit my mood that I went on and read the entire series, all the books that are out so far. So I actually am going to have a series review for this up later this week. So I'm going to try not to go into too much depth about these right now, but this series just so worked for me. So let me go through each of the books. First is Rain and Ruin. This is about a Princess Sultana who is trying to deal with a lot of politics and ends up trying to make an alliance with a neighboring empire that is semi at war with her own country. And a prince from that empire comes over to try to broker this alliance. They're dealing with a lot of politics within her own court, and also sort of falling for each other, even though politically that's just not at all the thing that they should be doing. This is a really great story. I loved all of the magic in this. There is so much cool magic. They each are mages of different houses, and they have all of these really cool powers. The romance in this was spectacular. There is just so much yearning, so much sexual tension. They really shouldn't be together, but they want to be together so bad. And the sex scenes in this were also super steamy, even though there's only a couple of them. Plus the political fantasy I loved. I loved all of the court intrigue. It was so cool. So this book is like one of my favorite books of the entire year. I think it is fantastic. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I immediately picked up the second book, which is Storm and Siege. And this one is very much an opposites attract type of story. So we have a captain of the palace guard who is an earth mage. He's very much kind of like do things by the book and, you know, follow all of the order and all of that sort of stuff. And he ends up coming in contact with a woman who is not at all that. She's sort of an opposite type of house mage. She's all about being a spy. She's really into espionage, and they're dealing with a lot of issues in the city right now refugee crisis, all these sorts of things that is stretching the captain very thin. And she is just one more thing that he's trying to deal with as she goes around doing her spying things. And they find each other incredibly attractive, but also she loves poking at him since she's very much not one to respect authority, and it's super funny. And I loved their dynamic. So I gave this one also 5 out of 5 stars. Next is Siren and Scion. So this book follows a woman who is a very powerful and rich merchant, but she's somebody who comes from a very traumatic past. Definitely content warnings for that, so check them out in the description box below if you're interested. And she's really working hard to try to secure safety and power and position for herself. And so to do this, she agrees to go on this quest for the Sultanate in order to try to find some lost magic that might be hiding out in the Republic, which is this country that they're kind of slightly at war with that maybe is going to be invading. And when she goes there, she gets help from a guy who is just very disreputable, a gambler, a thief, and he is trying to help her reluctantly, and they kind of find each other being attracted to one another, even though the circumstances are quite difficult. This one was not as much to my kind of style. I think that I loved still the politics and the fantasy, and there's a lot of really interesting expansions in the world building and in the plot that happen in this book, so I really loved that. But the couple was not my style of couple. And I think that, you know, normally in other types of romance series where they're true standalones, I would have just skipped this one. But because all of the fantasy plot kept developing, I really wanted to read all of that, even though the couple wasn't so much my thing. I think I just struggled with who they were as a person, and I never really fully bought into their relationship, and often just the decisions that were made just didn't make sense to me, that sort of thing. So very interesting in terms of the fantasy plot, but the romance wasn't quite my style. So this one I gave 3.5 out of 5 stars. And then lastly, I read the prequel to this series, which is Wind and Wildfire. This is basically taking place a generation before the main part of the series and follows the parents of the Princess Sultana from Reign and Ruin, as well as looks at the backstory of the main villain of the series. The romance in this centers around the Prince Sultan, who is somebody who has like a very dangerous magic that he's trying to get control of. And so he ends up getting an instructor at the University of Magic to try to help him learn how to control that. And even though their social statuses are just very, very different, and there's a lot of other political things going on, they end up really falling for one another. And I thought that their romance was also very sweet while dealing with some interesting politics. So I gave this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. So that is a very brief overview of those 4 books, but if you're at all interested in this series, definitely check out the series review that I'm going to have up later this week, and I'll talk a lot more in that about the magic and the politics and everything that really made this series so, so good. But yeah, I just want more, so much more. So all the rest of the books that I have to talk about are ones that I read during the reading vlog that I did of reading Read Becca's recommendations. I'll link her channel and that video below, but in case you missed it, I'll go ahead and briefly talk about them here. Starting with City of the Plague God by Sarwat Chadha. So this is a middle grade in the Rick Riordan Presents line, and it is inspired by sort of Epic of Gilgamesh and other Persian mythology. It takes place in modern day New York, and big content warnings, deals with the plague. And so this actually came out in 2020, and it's very interesting how it walks that line, but it was written before that, of course. And in this we follow a boy who's so, you know, earnest and just trying to help his parents run their deli, who ends up getting caught up with these gods, including a plague god, who are basically tearing apart his city, and he has to help fight against them, even though he's very much not a fighter. I really loved him as a character. I loved the magic. It does get a bit gross, I think, verges on body horror with everything that goes on with the plague god, but other than that, I thought it was fantastic, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read Fluff by Raven's Dagger. This is a lit RPG, which is absolutely something I'd never read before, but when Becca talked about it, it sounded fantastic. But it's basically a story that is about superheroes. But in this world, superheroes have like stats and levels and things like that. So it's very much set up the way that if you play RPG games, you'll see that kind of thing for your character, but that's how it works in this world. And we follow a girl who is just starting college, and she ends up on Power Day discovering that she has hero powers, except they're not hero powers, they're villain powers. And she's like, what? I don't want to be a villain. And so she's trying to keep it under wraps that she's villain, but she also has an ability that she kind of accidentally starts doing, which is summoning sisters, which are basically minions. And her first sister summon is a were-bear girl. And so she transforms into a bear. And so she ends up getting caught up in all of these kind of superhero villain things, even though she's just trying to live a regular life. But I loved the progression. This is so funny. It is so cozy. It is just heartwarming, and I loved the characters. When I was reading this book, all I wanted to do was read this book. So I absolutely loved this, and I really, really strongly recommend it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next is None But the Righteous by Chantel James. This is a literary fiction that centers around a young man who has grown up in some difficulty and really struggles to even be inside of his own body. But he also has a spirit that is living alongside his body and sometimes takes over, that sort of we're hearing the story from. And this takes place in the year after Hurricane Katrina. The boy was from New Orleans, and a lot of this is dealing with the trauma of what happened in New Orleans, as well as the trauma that he's gone through and how that is processed. It has a lot of layers. It has incredibly beautiful, poetic, atmospheric writing. I don't think that I understand everything that happened in this book, but I just loved being in the sentences. It was just so beautifully written, and I loved the connection between the way that the young guy was processing everything that had happened to him, or not processing it sometimes, and dealing with sort of the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. So I thought this was really beautiful, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Then there's How to Be Perfect by Michael Schur, which I listened to on audio, read by Michael Schur, but also has little bits here and there that are read by the various actors who were in The Good Place, because Michael Schur is the person who created The Good Place. And basically, this book is just him talking about moral philosophy, which is what The Good Place is sort of based on. And so it's him walking you through the big schools of thought of Western moral philosophy and talking about what those mean and how to apply it in daily life. And so he gives lots of little examples of the sorts of decisions that you might be faced with and how this might relate. And there's a lot of really interesting ethical discussions in this, and there's quite a bit of humor as well. I think that I was maybe expecting slightly more humor, and it did get just a little repetitive towards the end, but other than that, I thought this was such a fun book, and I really enjoyed it on audio, so I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Another audiobook I listened to was Dress Codes by Richard Thompson Ford, narrated by Bill Andrew Quinn. This is a fascinating nonfiction book that is all about laws and codes and regulations related to clothing, and really takes a look at from kind of the Elizabethan era through the modern era at how clothing has been regulated and how it's been used to enforce societal standards or enforce kind of social structure and class and things like that, while people have been trying to use clothing as a form of individual expression, and sort of the tension there, and how we see dress codes enact a lot of these societal values, things like what women should wear or what different classes should wear, or how to mark out people who are undesirable, these sorts of things. It's really fascinating, and because the author is a legal historian, it's just so well written and so well argued, and the ways that all of these legal cases are brought in is absolutely fascinating. It's got a real good social justice and feminist lens. Absolutely enjoyed reading this, and just it's so cool. So I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read The Phone Booth in Mr. Hirota's Garden by Heather Smith, illustrated by Rachel Wada. And this is a kid's picture book that has absolutely beautiful illustrations. I think that they are just stunning and so emotional and moving, that tell the story of, it's inspired by real life events, of a phone booth not connected to anything that is in a guy's garden that people go to in order to talk to their dead loved ones that were lost in the 2011 tsunami. It's really moving and just so beautiful. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I read Borders by Thomas King, illustrated by Natasha Donovan. This is a graphic novel that is about a family, in particular a mom and her teenage son, who are going to visit her adult daughter that lives in Salt Lake City. They are Blackfoot and they live north of the American border, and they have to cross the border to get there. And this is all about that border crossing, and in particular just dealing with the border crossing guards who ask for her nationality, and she will only say Blackfoot. She will not say American or Canadian. And so it's about that tension. So it's a very narrow scope, but I thought it was just really interesting, and I liked the family dynamics and the way that it talked about that, and the way that it talked about kind of citizenship and identity. So yeah, and the illustrations were really neat. I do think that the scope of the story actually could have been even shorter in terms of pages, but other than that, I thought this was so good. So I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Okay, so those are all of the books. Hopefully I didn't take too long talking about all of them, especially because I've talked about these, or will talk about them, in other places. But 2 of probably my favorite books of the year, Rain and Ruin and Fluff, are in this weekly wrap up. So if you guys take nothing else out of this, those 2 books are so good. I really recommend them. I would love to talk to you guys about any of the books though. So if you've read any of these, if you're interested in them, or if you want to tell me what you've been reading, anything at all, just leave me a comment down below.